42 miles. One road, it drifted offshore. We got John Reed on 42 miles south of Harpswell, just drifting around. We got it to home. 3 days. No, but he been to some police, so he wasn't around.
She's got something going on? You're sitting awfully low tonight.
Stuff is too complicated. Tell them.
Harpswell Select Board meeting, Thursday, September 19th. We'll start off with how you can participate with public comment via the Zoom platform. This meeting will be held at the Select Board's meeting room, the town office, and is also available for the Zoom platform. Remote participants must, and/or public comment during the meeting must be submitted to the Zoom platform application or by phone at 1-646-558-8656 and entering the meeting ID number, which is 831-4536-9700, and the passcode is 509835. Advised data rates may apply. Attendees should indicate their desire to speak by raising their hand or *9 on the phone. This should only happen during the appropriate point of public comment when called on. You can unmute your device by hitting *6 on your phone. Attendees must state their name before commenting. All right, thank you. We'll start with Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Adoption of the agenda. No additions, no replications?
I don't have anything.
No.
Public comment? No? Just checking. Select Board announcements.
No, I got nothing.
Yeah,
No.
Town Administrator's
I
report?
just have one brief item. Good evening, everyone. We are looking for an animal control officer, so if anyone is interested or knows of someone who may be interested, we have the job description on our website and an employment application. Thank you.
Oh. It's been long.
Excuse me.
Consent
I need
agenda.
water.
I move the consent agenda, which is approval of the minutes, and the election workers' appointments, municipal valuation form, and the authorization of the warrants as usual.
Second.
All in favor? Discussion? All right. Considering naming 2 town roads. All right. We got Farm Court. There's potential conflict with 2 business, 2 Coves Farm on Neil Point. All right, so that road will be called Farm C Lane, correct?
Well,
Those recommendations below.
I like your compromise, the
Yeah.
farm court.
Farm Court.
Yeah.
After all, no chicken chipper, nothing, no? All right. Everybody was happy with it?
I'll move we accept that. Farm
Second.
Court.
Any
Second.
discussion on that? Hope not.
Thank you.
All right. The other was Wisteria Lane, no conflicting. Chickadee Lane, no conflicting names. Northern Flicker. Recommendation is Wisteria Lane.
I move we accept that.
Second.
Discussion, don't see any. All in favor?
Aye.
Holy moly. All right. Many requests to renew the Oars Island Bridge lease.
Good evening, Paul Plummer, Town Harbor Master.
Oh, you broke it.
I broke it, yeah. It's really in my face here. So every year around the March timeframe, we send out renewal reminders to all the leaseholders of the Oars Island Bridge. This year, in March 12th, we sent out our first letter, and we heard back from everybody except Harold Maney at 1019 Harpswell Islands Road. We sent up a follow-up letter on June 10th. Still did not hear anything back or did not see a renewal. After 75 days, any renewal that comes before you is considered invalid. That's per the policy that you guys have as a select board. So the son and grandson approached me last week after they got notification that the wharf had not been renewed. And I explained to them the town policy, and I said that they would have to come before the Board of Selectmen to pitch their case about it being renewed. So I believe the family is here tonight if you want to hear from them.
One of you want to speak to it?
It's not in my face. I'm Harold Maney III. So my grandfather, my 90-year-old grandfather, who resides at 1019 Harpswell Island Road, who the pier had been leased to for years, had not let us know that it had come back up for release. And without us knowing, we weren't able to pay for that lease. We didn't notify anybody because we weren't notified, and it had just slipped his mind till it became time for us to start working on it and getting it prepped for the winter. So we came in to pay for the renewal because we didn't know anything about the 75-day or any of that at that point, which Plummer had shown us, and which is why we're here now. We would like to keep that, as our family's been the longest family down there since the early 40s. And we plan on being the end family there, or at least we hope, for years to come. So we're here to rectify whatever we need to do to keep this.
Well,
Go ahead.
Are you fishing? You have a lobster license?
We don't.
Either one of you?
No, my grandfather does.
All right. What we could do, we could renew it as long as your grandfather renews his lobster license and uses it for fishing. Because the only way you can get passed down to you guys is if you were in the maritime business. As these leases are being not used anymore, it goes back to the town and we use the lottery. And who applies for it, it doesn't matter if they're a clam digger, a lobsterman, aquaculture, or a wharf builder.
Yep.
But in your case, the only way that you could get away with it is if your grandfather renews his lobster license and continues the wharf.
Okay.
Beyond that, you two aren't eligible. So when your grandfather's gone, that's it, unfortunately. But
Unless someone else in your family wants to fish.
Right.
And
Well,
use it for
that
that.
would have been my next question,
Yeah.
actually. So,
yeah,
but we do have other fishermen, obviously. We're related to Harpswell.
Yeah.
So,
but to tell your grandfather to renew his lobster license. And,
yeah, I believe he has anyway.
yeah,
So,
but if he doesn't, and then it reverts back to the town.
okay.
I would move that we renew this lease contingent on seeing Harold's lobster license.
It's fine.
It's conditional.
Conditional? Oh,
It's conditional.
You made a motion to that
Yep,
effect?
yep.
Second.
Any discussion on it? Any further?
Oh, yeah.
What's that?
Oh, yeah,
A what?
I do. How do we get that to change? How do we bring it up?
You don't?
In front of the town?
Well, have someone in
And-
your family who's in the fishing business.
I'm saying, how do we change that rule?
Oh,
We don't. We just made it easier for families to keep it. It used to be if your father, or grandfather wasn't using it.
Yeah.
Kaput, it went back to the town, doesn't matter how many kids he has or what they're doing in business. We changed it 3 years ago so we can keep it in the families, like the Davis.
Yes, yep,
just
absolutely.
south of you.
Yep,
Yeah, Mark and his brother then, and little Mark,
yep,
they're all fishing.
Again,
They're all using it.
Yep.
On the other end, Paul Morgan's got a wharf building business.
right.
And
You may remember the history on this. 25 years ago, all you guys that had wharves there thought that was no man's land, that didn't belong to anybody, and the state said,
And
no,
your
no,
grandfather-
that's
yeah.
town land.
Yeah.
And so we had to protect ourselves from
Yeah.
liabilities and all kinds of issues that happen that way.
Okay.
We had to lease it to you guys, and, but we wanted it for fishing, for access for,
We were actually the
Water.
ones on the other side.
You were on the other
We were
side.
the
You were.
only ones.
right,
Yeah,
yeah,
but-
On the
yeah,
other side.
yeah,
There's stop parking over there.
yeah.
Yeah, but they did it.
Yeah.
Like,
But
in
they-
the,
Yep, so you know what the conditions are. It's up to your grandfather to get his license.
no, yeah, that's no problem.
All right.
So-
And
So
show
I'm
it to
fine
the-
with that.
Yeah, show it to the harbor master.
Okay,
Huh?
perfect.
Huh?
Thank you.
All in favor?
Perfect.
Thanks for remembering we
All right.
voted yet.
Paul, you're up again. Consider change of venue for mooring management software.
So good evening, Paul Plummer again. So the town has been using a vendor called Online Mooring for the last 5 years. It's gone mostly well, but I think we've had some critiques from the public that it may not necessarily be as user-friendly as it could be. I've certainly had frustrations from residents who've tried to pay using their cell phone. It's not every resident or mooring holder that pays with their cell phone, but it's sporadic that their payment may not go through. And so then it leads me to have to chase them down and say, hey, your payment didn't go through, and then they have to double check their banking account, and it just turns into a whole mess. So I've reached out to other harbor masters who use this other vendor, LinksLog, and there's been no complaints about payment functionality, anything like that. And also, part 2 of this is the invoicing, so we obviously do a lot of invoicing and trying to get the word out for renewals and renewal reminders. LinksLog provides a much more in-depth and professional-looking invoice. Again, we've appreciated our relationship with Online Mooring, but it was a very, very simple document, and it was almost embarrassing. So, again, speaking with other harbor masters who use LinksLog, I think it'll be seamless for the residents and the mooring holders. There will be some learning curves on our end, but if the board were to approve changing to this vendor, this company would begin working on the software immediately, or the database for Harpswell, so that by January 1st, when renewals go out, we'll be up and running with them.
Are there any startup costs?
There are no startup costs.
Okay, so
So they're basically doing this part for free, the uploading
Yep.
to January 1st.
they just got a little piece of the action down the road.
So the other question is, how much more or less expensive is this one than the previous one?
So as of right now, we're gonna be locked into a 2-year contract. And our current budget, and I looked to the treasurer to remind me, I believe it's 13 or 14,000.
14.
14 for online mooring,
Just for mooring?
just for moorings.
So it looks like we get a deal if we include shellfish. You're not ready to do that?
So I explained to the owner, we'd be willing to take on the shellfish for staff internally. We can start learning the system, tracking shellfish harvesters, conservation credit.
Right.
And then maybe in 2026, implement fees being collected from the harvesters through this, if they choose to pay online or something like that.
So do we get the $11,000 deal if we have it staff only?
We get the 11,000, because by committing that we can do staff only, they said we can get the 11.
So that's the one you want to do.
That is, yep. And then the treasurer and I did talk, and we discussed to make sure that there wouldn't be some hidden fee, you know, after 2 years, like, oh, we're gonna add on $6,000. Theirs is gonna be a price per mooring, and they said it's not like, you know, we go up by 20 moorings. They're saying if you go up by 200 moorings, well, then they're gonna include that extra $2 per mooring. So they're not gonna go after us for the couple moorings here and there, but if we continue to go up, and vice versa, if we go down in moorings, the price will reduce that way too. So, the staff recommendation is to move forward with Link's Log, and we're here before you tonight to get that approval.
Makes sense?
Yep.
So move.
Oh,
Oh, you want to say something, Carrie?
oh.
I just wanted to add that in addition to the two that were, if the board agrees, and it sounds like the board will, those two modules, they have a number of other modules that we're not interested in at this time, but this software has some room to grow. It does dog registrations, which we don't need because we use the state of Maine's, but it has all sorts of other things, including,
Overnight parking, I know we use the rec director's
Right.
program
Right.
now, but if we ever decide to more consolidate,
Right.
it can do stuff like that.
but it's a good decision going with something that can grow with you and offer other services. So it's more than just mooring management.
Thank you.
And one other quick point, we don't require people to do it online, so they'll
Correct.
still be able to come in for those people who prefer not to use the online
Correct.
method.
Yep.
Thank you.
The old analog way of doing things. So I made a motion.
Second.
Any more discussion? All in favor?
Thank you.
Well, discussion of the future of Potts Point Wharf.
I think we're going to keep the harbor master
right
up here all
Yes.
night.
Yeah. Didn't mean for you to sit down.
Okay, so I'll just give you a brief update of what's transpired since January. And January storms is when the pier was taken out at Potts Point. So we initially staff worked with the insurance company. We met on site with our representative, Dan Noonan, showed them pictures of what was there and what occurred. And they've come back to the town twice with their estimate on how much they're gonna reimburse the town. So on April 5th, we got a document that stated they estimated there were cost value at just over $50,000, which we kind of balked at because that was
Yeah.
in today's world. So they were going to reimburse the town at $26,700 and change. The administration kind of went back and forth with them, and the insurance company finally said, they agreed with us that the estimate was very low, and they came back on May 30th and estimated the replacement cost to be about $110,000, and they were going to reimburse the town an additional $68,000, almost $69,000. So the total that they've committed to right now is $95,613.70. They are still working with Custom Float, who we use to get an estimate with, to finalize a number. So this likely isn't the final number. We don't know how much higher it's going to go, but this is what we know right now. So we've also worked with Mike Drake and MEMA and FEMA to find out what kind of mitigation maybe can be done, or some sort of grant funding through FEMA. There are possibilities there. We do know there's a tight timeline of February of 2026 for certain programs. We're not positive what the town would qualify for and if there's extensions beyond that. But that's certainly a pretty tight timeline. So just to give you an outline, so the rough quote that Custom Float has been working with the insurance adjuster on was a 6-foot wide pier, 150 feet in length, which is what it was, and 2 to 3 feet higher. And they estimated a cost of $132,000 to $136,000 to do that, because they'd be using the existing crib work, which saves a good amount of money there. But that's pretty much it for a timeline there. So that's,
Yep.
we're at about 90, about $96,000 that we know we're going to be reimbursed for.
Yeah. What's the latest movement from FEMA? You know,
Oh,
Christine,
boy, it
Terry?
is so hard to get answers from FEMA on this project. They have indicated that they would look at our proposal if the town wanted to move forward with a more resilient dock.
Yeah.
If we do rebuild, they will give us our deductible, which, we didn't get from the insurance company, obviously. It's a $15,000 deductible that we can add to the insurance money. FEMA's grant program to make it more resilient, it's really up in the air. We don't know if we're going to qualify, but the staff is interested in getting feedback from the board if you want us to follow through on that grant program, or at least the grant application.
Yeah.
And I will just tell you, everything takes a long time when you're going through FEMA. We've submitted a lot of payments that we've made. We have no idea when we're going to get reimbursed, months.
And FEMA did
down the
say
line.
their mitigation agent who came up, so mitigation is the raising and widening, making it more sturdy. They can reimburse up to 100%, but the town's gonna pay up front. So that's the kicker. So if you budget a certain year to do the work, you may not get reimbursed till the following year. So those are things to think about.
Thank you for saying that, Paul, because the point is that if the board wants to consider rebuilding, you will have to have a warrant article in March.
Right,
And you're going to have to budget your differences
right.
for hopeful reimbursement, if determined.
I just want to make it clear, when I said reimburse up to 100%, not the total project, but whatever the cost of the mitigation. So if it was an extra 10 grand to make it higher and wider, they may reimburse up to that amount.
All right.
All right, thank you.
Do you want to give some specific direction on how we should be dealing with FEMA? Should we clearly submit some type of grant application?
Yeah. But would we have to include a design in that, in the application?
I'm assuming we'd have to have some type of design to show the additional height.
To apply for FEMA, I think we'd have to
Yeah.
provide absolutely some sort of engineering
Yeah.
design.
Could we single source somebody to design that for us?
I don't want to speak for Mike, the town's ZM agent, but everything he says is they always want to see the process through.
Yeah.
They want to see, so if the town's process is to do a bidding process, they like to see that.
Okay.
And where would you take the funding if you're designing this year? The funds are gone.
Right.
Well, that was question number 2.
My budget can't absorb that.
Yeah,
But
Oh.
you're still waiting for a final cost estimate on what the project will cost?
Correct.
To rebuild. And what's the timeline for that, do you know?
We got an email last week, I believe, from the insurance adjuster who said are just wrapping up conversations with Custom Float, so I can send another email tomorrow saying, where are we at?
I think one of the purposes of the conversation is to try to manage expectations, because it's going to take some time, especially if we go through the FEMA process. But as the treasurer indicated, the town would have to pay for this project essentially upfront for the most part, and then seek reimbursement.
We still don't know what the cost is yet.
No.
No, you raise the wharf, you're gonna have to get a longer ramp.
So Custom Float did provide that estimate of 132 to 136,000. That was 4 months ago, 3 months ago.
And that's with it raised, Paul?
That's with it raised. Yeah.
And the grant program is for what? What would we be,
It'd be for mitigation, so it'd be the act of raising it. So basically, if you were to replace exactly what was there, and then whatever the cost is to make it
better.
higher and wider and more resilient.
okay, okay,
So that additional cost to make it more resilient.
okay.
Yeah.
So it does mean a warrant if we go.
It does.
Yeah, it seems
We don't
should
have
be
the
able to-
numbers, yeah.
Seems we should be able to pull all it together for March. I mean, not certainly have enough answers to be able to vote on it.
Well, we put the whole wharf on for March.
Mm-hmm,
Yeah, oh, yeah.
mm-hmm.
They sent it to the budget committee. for-
My question is, then do we have the grant, do we apply for the grant after the warrant is passed? Or is that part of the package that we're putting together?
I think it's a question for our emergency management agent.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we meet weekly, well,
Okay.
maybe not weekly anymore, but we actually have a meeting tomorrow, so we can
So what's
find
the,
out some more details about that program.
steps that we
I think as
would
long
take
as
with
we're
FEMA?
expressing interest,
yeah,
we may still have some time before we actually have to complete some paperwork.
and with the grant, we can go ahead and apply for the grant as part of our strategy for coming to the March meeting.
I think we
I think
carefully
we should try
word,
to, yeah. we should
carefully
try to
word the
get the
article,
grant.
so we're not pulling the wool over anyone's eyes, and, you know, everyone knows what's going on.
Yep. Is that a final figure from the dock builder?
I wouldn't lock them into that right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that
It
was,
seems kind of low.
it doesn't,
It does.
but they are really great at what they do. They're a big company.
And they're reusing the cribs.
They're reusing the cribs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, see if we get locked in before, middle of October.
We might need an escalator, to consider.
There always is.
So are you advising staff to move forward with getting plans drawn up, or?
Well, we'll have to get a warrant to get the money, to get the plans drawn up. But, yeah,
So that won't be until March.
yeah.
Correct.
Well, there's no money.
However, there's a lot of legwork to be done in order to put an article together for town meeting, so.
I think we
that
can
stuff-
move some things along.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that stuff needs to get done.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank
you.
Right. Yeah.
Cool.
John Lloyd's, Potts Harbor. So I'm confused about the design, and when it goes out to get plans, do you design it so that it will meet whatever FEMA would want for reimbursement, or do you
Yeah.
just do a basic replacement? I mean, how do you decide?
Yeah, there's
What
two
to go
different
forward with.
programs. So one is FEMA will just replace what you had. But since we're getting insurance money, they're only maybe going to make up the difference of that.
Right.
And the deductible. They have a second program that you apply for that would allow you to get money to make it more resilient, to make it higher, to do some things that we had, not previously had there, that location.
So do you get two numbers then, one for a replacement and one for an enhanced replacement, which would satisfy FEMA's requirements,
Right.
hopefully?
The word resilient in both plans.
Yeah.
As many times as you could squeeze it in there. They love that stuff.
But there's replacing what was there, and
Yeah.
then there's building something more resilient.
Well, building something identical would be a smooth move.
Right, which is why we're bringing up this,
Yeah.
idea about the other
I can't imagine
program.
it'd be that much more expensive to raise it 2 feet. So, the decking's the same, it's just a matter of 2 more posts.
Were you going wider in this new
Yeah, so
proposal?
I'll share, it may not have made it to your packet, but the email communication I had with Custom Float when they gave us this wider and taller, so 6 feet wide, 2 to 3 feet higher. They said the cost isn't that much more because they're not having to cut the boards any
Right.
shorter. So you're not really losing a whole lot, it's just, but the labor's the same.
Yep.
So it's not a whole lot of extra work, they said, or money for them to do that.
And maybe including that, when you get their prices, an extra float, maybe going to the north.
Yes.
You and I talked about.
Yep.
some Recreational one end, maybe commercial on the other. Yeah. What's that? Whatever. Yeah. Which way? All right. Well, at this point, we have to open up a public hearing. So, unless there's anything else from the Danas. No. All right. At this point, it's now 6:30, and open public hearing regarding possible consent agreement with Coastal Maine Ventures LLC, tax map 63, lot 77.
So our town attorney, Amy Chow, is here tonight, and she may want to lead this off,
Thought
this
she might.
consent agreement.
Happy to do that. I am here in my capacity as assisting the code enforcement office, though I want to be sure about that, about what my role has been in this. I know Margaret and Tim are here, and they may be able to answer any specific questions.
There we go. I heard two.
But just briefly, the procedural background of this is, and there are a lot of facts, but the very specific procedural situation that we're in is that there was a notice of violation that the Code Enforcement Office filed in connection with work that had been done on a dock or wharf at 28 Field Road. And the Code Enforcement Office believes that a permit was required prior to conducting that work. The owner had conducted that work. There had been previous discussions before. The code office had made clear they felt that further work would require a permit. And so when it was discovered that the work had been done without a permit, inspections were made, and the notice of violation letter did issue. There's a right to appeal the notice of violation letter, and that is what the owners did. So there was an administrative appeal filed to the Board of Appeals, and we have met a few times with the Board of Appeals, but haven't addressed the substance of the alleged violations, because the parties, and the parties being the Code Enforcement Office on the one hand, and the owners at 28 Field Road, have been discussing the terms of a possible consent agreement, which is the topic that is before you tonight. It's my understanding that you all have a copy of the proposed consent agreement, and I know the attorney for the owners is here, and you can check with her as well. But I believe in sum and substance, the Code Enforcement Office and the owner agree on those terms. There is a blank you'll see in the consent agreement language itself regarding what amount of penalty or fine, if any, should be assessed, and the Code Enforcement Office does have a recommendation. But that I wanted to give that background before getting into the facts, and to see if the board has any questions, and if not, how you would like to proceed.
So I assume both parties are in agreement to the consent agenda at this point.
Yes, and I'm looking to the Code Enforcement Office, and
Front row.
so I'm getting the complete nod from the attorney for the owners. So this is a public hearing. The recommendation was that this should come to you, so that participants, abutters, any members of the public could comment on this before you consider adoption of the consent agreement.
Right.
And if the consent agreement is reached, then as one of the terms, there will be no need for a hearing before the Board of Appeals and a decision made on the administrative appeal. It would essentially obviate the need for any continued administrative litigation in that context.
So the only blank in this consent agreement, which I'm assuming needs to still be agreed to, is the amount
Yes.
of the penalty.
The owner's attorney and I agreed that we would leave that amount blank, and that both sides could make their own pitch to you as to an appropriate amount.
So it's based on our cost. Who has a number?
Oh, before we go there,
Yeah.
David, I do have a question about the agreement.
Yes.
It's a section I don't understand fully. It's the third from the bottom, whereas, concerning determining the boundary between the lots.
Yes.
It's unclear to me whose responsibility it is to determine that boundary.
Is this the commencing litigation piece?
Yes, owners
Yes.
have commenced litigation.
Yes.
Yes.
So If you'd like to get into the substance of this, I'd be happy to provide at least my perspective of some of those issues that I think are germane to the consent agreement and how that fits within the context of your land use ordinance, if that's helpful.
Well, I think, do I understand this to say that
I'm looking.
there will be a determination of a boundary, or is that not correct?
So there may be, and I will ask the attorney for the owner to speak to that issue. I know this is not a document that you have in the record,
Right, yeah.
but this is not a survey.
Talking about the riparian
But
line.
yes, I'm talking about the riparian line, David. So again, keeping in mind this is not to scale, and there may be some dispute. I don't think there's a dispute that there is an encroachment over the property line. The blue figure there represents the dock. Okay, and so this is a very small lot.
Yeah.
Very, very small. And the dock has been there for quite some time, as has the fish house, and not in a great state of repair. And so the reason I mention that is that we believe that renders the dock a non-conforming structure.
Right.
And so that feeds you into the portion of your shoreline zoning ordinance that deals with what you can do with non-conforming structures, and whether you can get a permit, and specifically what you can do to either, in this case, completely replace a non-conforming structure, to not completely replace, but to, if 50% or less of the structure has been removed, damaged, or destroyed, actually reconstruct it in place. So you have, I think of it as 3 levels of permits, or 3 levels of things you have to think about what's going to happen to the structure. Your ordinance says if it's a complete replacement, which is defined as over 50% of the assessed value has been removed, damaged, or destroyed, and you're going to replace it, then the standards under mandatory shoreline zoning guidelines, as well as your ordinance, require that the structure be moved back from the encroaching setbacks and the shoreline zone to the greatest practical extent. The owner did apply for a permit from the town to replace the dock. It was denied. So that permit application was denied, and that decision was not appealed. And one of the issues was based upon whether or not the dock could be moved in some way to render it more conforming, maybe not completely conforming, but to the greatest practical extent. So that issue has come and gone. And the question is, I mentioned there were 3 areas. So there's that full replacement permit provision. There's another 10.3.2 of your ordinance, shoreline zoning ordinance, has a 50% or less trigger of the assessed value as calculated in your ordinance. If that much of the structure, in this case the dock, has been removed, damaged, or destroyed, then the ordinance allows you to reconstruct it in place, meaning you don't need to comply with the greatest practical extent. You could construct it in place, reconstruct it in place. Okay. And then there's a question of whether you can do normal maintenance, upkeep, and repair of a dock, for which no permit is required. And the dispute essentially that led to this NOV was a dispute between the owner and the code office as to whether a permit was required. The owner maintained that all I'm doing is repairs, and I don't need a permit. The code office in her NOV letter stated that this was not just repair. This looked like a replacement. It looked like it might be an over 50% replacement. And in any event, where the parties have reached an agreement is that the owner has agreed to file an after-the-fact permit for at least a 50% or less permit, if that makes sense. So rather than argue in a hearing over whether we triggered the 50% or over, or we're under that, it's the code office's belief that whatever was being done at the site well surpassed normal upkeep, maintenance, and repair. And rather than litigate that and have the Board of Appeals reach a decision on that after a hearing, the parties agreed. And the owner disputes this. That's what it says in the consent agreement. But the parties agreed that the owner would file for 2 after-the-fact permits. The 50% or less permit in the shoreline zone and a floodplain management permit, and would pay the triple cost that your ordinance requires for an after-the-fact permit. So that's in essence in a nutshell, I think, what is being asked here. And Jane, sorry, this is a long circuitous response to why do we have that section in there. And perhaps the owner's attorney would want to address that. In my mind, it may be there because I think the ship has sailed on whether this particular applicant, this owner, can obtain a replacement permit. Because it was applied for, it was denied, that decision was never appealed. And so some circumstance needs to change vis-a-vis the property, potentially vis-a-vis property lines, such as maybe to render this dock not a non-conforming structure. That remains to be seen. That's private litigation. We've been advised, the town has been advised that litigation has commenced. The town has no part in that litigation. But as of now, we believe that the owner may not, again, under the current conditions of the property, file for and obtain a replacement permit for that dock because the appeal period's run and that decision has become final. Unless there are circumstances that change, that would change how your ordinance operates. So that's why I think that's there for background, Jane. I'll let the owner's attorney address that issue.
Could I just
Yes.
see if I understand what you said about that phrase, the one about the litigation around the boundary?
Yes.
That is, the town is not involved in that.
Correct. The town is
That's
not
what I
involved
was-
in that.
Okay, that's all I need
That's
to know.
private litigation.
Okay.
So Amy, this agreement doesn't have anything to do with the riparian line then, is that what you're saying?
Well, it doesn't change the riparian line or impact it
Right, right,
whatsoever.
right.
Correct.
Right. It
Good.
sort of looks around it.
And an important, I just want to mention also, an important feature of this consent agreement to the Code Enforcement Office is that not only that the owner obtain this after-the-fact permit, but that any future work on this dock, whether you could call it upkeep, maintenance, or repair, triggers the need to go to the code office and obtain another permit. And the reason for that, it's quite important to the Code Enforcement Office, that we don't want to allow a situation where by piecemeal an owner can come in and do a few repairs this season, next season, a future season, and end up essentially with a replacement dock when that permit request was denied. That's not how your ordinance, I believe, is intended to work. And so we put provisions in this consent agreement to underscore that.
So last year, we dealt with the neighbor. Was it last year? I lose track.
Yeah, a couple years ago.
And the riparian line was an issue then, but everyone seemed to understand where that line was. So,
That's not our concern.
but, no, yeah,
That's not our concern.
right. Just as a hint, by the way.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
You know, if maybe the code office would give us a quick rundown from day one, what they were told, what landowners were told, what commenced after that, and how this progressed to where we are. Flip a coin.
Don't fight over it.
Just a quick timeline, Tim.
When this property came out for sale, there was many people that came in and inquired about it, and they were all told the same thing, that this is a very, very small piece of property. It already goes across a neighbor's lot line. It's going to be very hard to get a permit for this thing. The owner today was told that as well before they left the office and purchased it. So We went through a lot of things, even having the site soil evaluator tell us that there was a system there just because there was a hole in the floor. And there's ledge totally under this whole property. All of the piers needed to be replaced. The whole top needed to be replaced. Nothing had been done since I've been back in this area for the past 10 or 12 years to keep this property up so that it could be used. So it was just a piece of land. That was it. Like I said, the permit got denied. Then we saw work going on, so we said this has got to stop, and that's where we came up with a disagreement of how you interpret the 50% rule. I don't know if that helps you at all, but off the top of my head.
No, that's fine.
So did you guys check with assessing on the value? Because we had to change a few things due to a
Right.
house that was, you remember it, torn down and.
Well, I think that's part of my problem with a lot of property, because we haven't had current assessments for 15 years, and we're so far behind in it that only the places that have permits or exchange do get any looks at that value. You know, there's market value, there's assessed values. I'd like to add one more that I feel like, is it structurally sound value? Is it even, you know, but that's all interpretations. Well, all the numbers are. I would like, where we came from before, we had access to the MLS. Well, then we could pull up, at least, if we wanted to compare this house to this house, and take in the assessed value, but also the market values. You could get all of that information and make a better informed decision. But to that, I haven't been able to get that done yet.
Okay.
All right, thanks. Good. Any thoughts?
Do we want, is there any public comment?
That's gonna, after we,
Yeah.
would anybody like to speak to this?
Hi, I'm Kristen Collins. I represent the owners, Coastal Maine Ventures and the Cluffs who are behind it. This is a serious microphone.
Okay.
Just some further background. I think that part of this has been colored by this perception that these guys bought this property to use that fish house as a residence, and that there was some plan to make this into a tiny camp and a residential wharf, and that's not their intention at all. They have bought property elsewhere in Harpswell. They have commercial fishing license, shellfish and lobstering licenses, and that's how they intend to use this thing if and when they can get it into a good structurally sound condition. So they have bought this property, and it does have a structure on it. Whether it turns out that that structure is non-conforming because it does go over a property line, or conforming because the property line has been moved, either it was incorrect from the start, and surveys might show that in this litigation, or there's been adverse possession over these many decades, and the property line has effectively been moved. So when you have a non-conforming structure, you have rights to that structure, and you're protected through grandfathering, or what we call non-conforming structures under the shoreline zoning ordinance. If that structure goes away, like being washed out by one of these big storms you all were talking about earlier, those property rights go away. And depending on how long of a time passes, you may not be able to rebuild it. So the Cluffs started out with this intention and plan to rebuild the dock, entirely, and ran up against this issue of it being a non-conforming structure, and how do you relocate it? Do you have to relocate it to be as conforming as possible? And yes, the permit was denied. They did actually try to amend that permit request to show that, if they moved it further in the other direction, it's going to violate the other person's setback. So they wanted that point considered, but it was never considered. At the same time, they're thinking, well, the weather is bad, the structure is bad, we need to secure this thing so that we don't lose our rights to the structure. We've got all of this stuff swirling around. We did get DEP approval and Army Corps approval for the replacement, so we know we have that in place, but we need to address this lot line issue. So in order to just shore up the dock, Mr. Clough went out there in mid-April and started adding on, basically, structural elements to keep it all in place, so bracing. So if you go out there, it looks like a lot of new lumber, and I could see where the CEO, when they went to look at it, thought, whoa, there's a lot of work going on, and that looks like a lot of lumber. But if you actually look at what was replaced, it was one piece, one post. That's all that's been replaced. So in terms of the ordinance, if we're going to say that it's reconstruction or replacement, there was only that one piece that was replaced. So the Cloughs had a really hard time in the first instance understanding what they were and weren't allowed to do in terms of upkeep and maintenance versus reconstruction. They were misled to some extent because the CEO, I think it was Margaret, had mentioned to them that on that fish shack, they could do up to the 50% of the value of that fish shack, which I think was something like $4,000 at the time. And I think the point was you can barely do anything to it. So they took that to mean you can do work up to 50% of the value without the permit. And so that's why Mr. Clough was out there doing this work, thinking it was okay. He wasn't removing or replacing anything but that one piling, and generally was just adding some stuff on to make sure it didn't float away, and take out a neighbor's dock with it. So we are here, though, to resolve the notice of violation, and I hope you all have had a chance to read that notice of violation carefully, because it's actually not where we are today in terms of what we're talking about in the ordinance. So what that notice of violation said was, we think you've done more than 50%, and because of that, you need a permit. So we read that notice of violation and said, no way have we done 50%, because he's only done $4,000 worth of work, and the dock is assessed at $22,000. So immediately we're like, this thing is wrong because we're nowhere near the 50%. So we appealed the notice of violation, and then we start talking to the town attorney, who I think hadn't been consulted yet at that point before the notice of violation was written. I'm not sure. But what this morphed into was not you only need a permit because it's tripped the 50%. It was you need a permit because you did replacement and reconstruction to any small degree, even if it was well below the 50%. So yes, there is this dispute. We believe that there are people throughout this town every day in the summer replacing little pieces of their docks, because that's the only way you can maintain or keep up a dock. You take a rotted piece off, you put a fresh piece back on. And if replacing that one piling is enough to trigger a permit requirement, then so is replacing that one piece of deck or that one piece of railing. I'm not sure that that's a precedent the select board wants to set in terms of the burden on staff and the enforcement requirement to go out and monitor all this stuff that's happening every day. But for the purpose of this agreement, we're willing to say, fine, up to 50%, that one piling was enough to trigger it. We'll come back and get the after-the-fact permit. But I really want you to understand that this is not like so many of those cases where somebody gets a notice of violation and they just thumb their nose at it. The notice of violation itself was wrong in the first instance in the way it sort of cited the ordinance. And so, this under 50% was not part of the early discussion. So in terms of the legal fees that it took to get here and the time that it took to get here, that was a lot of back and forth discussion between the two attorneys to kind of understand the town's position here. So here we are with an agreement. It's actually a really simple issue. It's the guy who didn't know he needed a permit, did some work, finds out he needs a permit, and here he is asking for one. And I think your ordinance already covers that by requiring that guy to pay 3 times the permit fee. So that's what we'd like to ask for is, this was a product of a lot of confusion and a lot of unanswered questions from the applicant to the town and a lot of kind of back and forth to figure out where we actually stood on this. And so we're asking to pay the 3 times the permit fee, get those permits, which should be no problem, and get this all resolved so that he can hold on to the structure long enough, and this is why I put that provision in there, long enough to go through that litigation to figure out what he can even do without losing the structure, losing the rights to it. So the only other thing that I would like to, we're not here to revise and wordsmith this document, but a couple of things that I would like to see changed. The 4th whereas, like I just said, it was only that one post that was replaced. And that 4th whereas seems to indicate that it was more than. And that was my error to not notice that. Mr. Clough did today. And then the only other thing that we thought would be a good idea is to document how much money had been put into it so that when he does come in later on because, something else might be falling off and he wants to fix it, that there's a measure of, you've already done 15%, you have another 35% to work with. I think that benefits the town too, so that there's certainty here and clarity. But that's, I think, up to the board to decide whether that's important.
So the 4th whereas is the one where it says in early spring of 2024?
Yes.
What did you want to change on that?
It says to replace damaged and rotten pilings. It was actually to replace one damaged and rotten piling,
So not plural.
not plural, singular. And I don't think, Mr. Clough, you even replaced some other rotten boards, right? You did not,
And take out some other rotten boards.
correct? And any questions for me or them?
No.
Is there anything you all would like to say?
Good evening. Good evening. I'm Jessie Clough. This is my husband, Jamie. He goes as James, but goes by Jamie. And this is our oldest son, David Clough. We're very excited to be part of this Harpswell community. We're in our mid-50s, and we came here, as many do, for where you want to live and be part of a community for the remainder of your life. And that's why we're here. And we're figuring out what can be done and can't be done regarding accessing the water. And my youngest son, James, who's not here tonight, he is 16, and he's really the main reason we're all here tonight because he's a 5th-generation lobsterman. He has his apprentice license, and he's excited for his future. He's not a traditional student in many ways, but he's working his way through school, and this is what he wants to do. So we've lived at our home in Mount Vernon for 34 years. I've been there a little longer, and we're just helping him pursue his dreams. And our oldest son, David, went to Maine Maritime Academy, and he's currently working in the construction business. And he also he lives in Bowdoin with his wife and children, and he also does a lot of work on the islands. So we were very excited to get an opportunity to, even though it's been represented that this is really a dilapidated small property, which sounds insignificant to most people, this is a really big opportunity for us and our family. And this process has been very, very challenging. And we really want to work with the community to, basically do no harm. We've purchased a home just up the street from the 28 Field Road. We're up on Holbrook. I'm now a resident of Harpswell, which I'm proud to say. And I look forward to getting this situation resolved to the best of the ability of all of us involved. It is complicated, it is messy, it's been very uncomfortable. We spent our life savings to purchase this property, and I've never hired an attorney before, so this is new. So we're working class, we're cabinet makers by trade, and we're called Coastal Maine Ventures because this is our next venture. We'd like to do work on the islands. My son currently does a lot of work on the islands. So we were looking for a commercial property, a commercial wharf that we could afford. And that's what brought us here. So thank you for your time tonight. Appreciate it.
So you all understand, it's in the CF1 zone, it's commercial fishing zone, so that's
Yeah.
I would just like to respond to a few points that Attorney Collins made related to this consent agreement. First of all, although this is not germane to this proceeding, I think the comment was made that there's a perception here that the owners bought the property to use this as a residence, and that is not their intention. That may not be their intention today, but I do think it's relevant history that the owners did apply, in fact, to convert this fish house to a one-bedroom, one-bath house, residential unit, back in January of this year. That application was denied, and there was no appeal taken from that decision. I understand they're moving on and trying to figure out how they can use this structure, but I thought that fact was relevant, especially to Tim's point about when this property went out on the market, and many questions were asked of the code office, what could be used, how could this property be used? But moving on to the dock, I want to respond to the request or the issue of whether you should modify the fourth whereas paragraph to say that only one damaged piling was replaced and removed. The issue in the code office's mind is not how many pilings were removed. The issue is whether the section in your ordinance, the specific provision 10.3.2.3, which allows a reconstruction or replacement of a nonconforming structure, if 50% or less of the assessed value of that structure has been either removed, damaged, or destroyed. So the issue is, I think, the important context here is this structure, if you saw pictures of it, is not safe or usable in its current state. In the code office's minds, and I'll let them speak to it if they'd like to, it is not safe to be used without a complete replacement. Your ordinance says you can reconstruct a nonconforming structure if only a certain amount of it has been removed, damaged, or destroyed, and you can only do it within a period of 1 year. I think a generous reading for the owners is that the code office was willing to say the removal occurred whenever that removal occurred early this year. And so you can get a permit within 1 year of that date, right? In other words, I don't know, it was this spring that the work was done, that the code office was notified and responded. I think there's a way that you could also read this section, though, to say there was damage and destruction over a long period of time on this structure, certainly well over a year ago. It's been plain and patent and visible and observable. And I think the intent of this provision that we are now using and agreeing for an after-the-fact permit to be sought and granted arguably doesn't even apply here because this structure was damaged or destroyed to such an extent to render it unusable well before a year ago. And the intent of this provision is to allow this a reconstruction or replacement to occur within a specific time frame. So I think the emphasis on only one piling was removed. The fact that one piling was removed and that bracing occurred doesn't render this structure usable today. And yet, as a compromise, I think the code office was correct in saying some kind of permit was needed here, and unless circumstances change, rendering this no longer a non-conforming structure, this owner cannot replace or reconstruct this dock at this juncture. So the code office would object to any change to paragraph 4. Also, I wanted to mention that Ms. Collins mentioned the question of whether the amount spent on repairs should be in the consent agreement. This was something we discussed, and the code office expressly objected to. There was a question of whether the methodology used to determine exactly how much work had been done needed to be part of this consent agreement. Again, the code office's position is that's not necessary. And it really isn't, it wouldn't actually be within the purview of the Board of Appeals, actually, is to tell the code office how to apply the ordinance in the future. And I would respectfully suggest it's also not the Board of Selectmen's job to do that here in the context of a consent agreement. So the code office would object to that as well. Finally, I want to just speak to the issue of penalty or fine, and I know, leave it up to, of course, this board's sound discretion. The code office has put a considerable amount of time into this case as well, and it is true that the attorneys on both sides, on my end and on the owner's end, didn't come in until a little bit later, until many permit applications with respect to this property had already been applied for and denied. So there has been some ramp-up time, and this has not been a simple case. But I would suggest that $5,000 goes a long way towards addressing not all of the costs expended in terms of legal fees to assist the code office in this case, but it does go a long way towards that. And so that is the number that the code office is recommending here. Thank you.
Thank you.
I just want to say real quick that if $5,000 is the number, we are just going to go to the Board of Appeals and pursue that. And, it's just, at the end of the day, like I said, this is work done without a permit that we're agreeing to get a permit for. So if we can resolve this for $2,000 or less, I think we're good. Otherwise, I think we're going to the Board of Appeals, and that's more attorney time on both sides. And, at that point, even an interested party could appeal that to the court, even if either the town or the applicant is satisfied, and it just keeps going on from there. But I think we're willing to take our chances at the Board of Appeals because on the face of that notice of violation, it's just objectively provable that they didn't go over the 50%.
I've kind of been involved in this from the beginning. The code office has kind of kept me informed in the whole thing, and they were told no in the beginning, and no was an acceptable answer, and they kept doing what they were going to do, and they did apply initially for that to be a one-bedroom thing, regardless of what she said ahead of time. So, at this point, I agree with what our town attorney says as far as the fine goes.
Did you want to take comments from the public?
Yeah, I'll go into it in a second. Yeah. Yeah, somebody make a motion, then I'll enter. But does anybody else want to speak to this?
Hey there. So when I purchased it, in the MLS, it said it was a camp. I did research. Dennis Austin, had a mattress in it, so on and so forth. Stephen Davis lived in it for a year while he was building his house. His brother lived in it for a year. And if you go back to when the road was conveyed over by Freeland Anderson, you'll notice in the town office here that it describes that dwelling as a camp, and it uses it as a bearing. It says Anderson's left northeast corner of camp. So that was the only basis of applying a permit for a camp. I was never told it was a fish house from the beginning.
I would think before you bought it, you would have gone to the townhouse and found out what it was. If it was being used, it didn't have any facilities, so it just...
Until I started ripping out carpet and stuff is when I noticed that rusted out flange, which looked like an old fiberglass housing from an old lobster boat that somebody put in the floor.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it was, Stephen Davis's family or, the people that stayed in it. And there was also another hole in the floor where you could tell there was a kitchen sink. It has a propane tank outside. It had a gas stove in it at one point. That was the basis of getting a permit for a camp.
Right, but you couldn't do any of that in the CF1 zone. That's not anything you could do.
That's all understood now, that they kind of needed a lawyer to understand all that.
All right.
Well, I know, if you buy a building and there's no septic, there's no well, there's a hole in the floor where the toilet was. That's the way things were done 50, 60 years ago, but, not anymore. You should have done your due diligence, and then after you were told no, you just kept going with it. And you didn't leave us any recourse here.
I'm sorry, but that's not true. They didn't continue with work on that camp. They didn't do any work on that camp, and they only braced up that dock. They didn't replace it. So they were denied a permit to replace it and to replace that fish house, but they did not do any of that work that was described in that denied permit.
We'll find out from codes what work was done. Your turn, Margaret.
Margaret McIntyre from the Codes Office. I just want to say that the idea behind my notice of violation, while I might have added incorrectly, I would say that the idea behind it was you're going to need to replace way more than 50% of the structure or 50% of the value of the structure to make this a usable dock. You're going to have to replace 100%. And that was kind of the idea behind the NOV. I don't know how many pilings exactly he removed or replaced, but a lot of work was done last, maybe January, to shore it up. And then more work was done this spring to continue that work.
Thanks. Anybody else?
Matt Gilly, my family's in a butter. And I'm also, I wear two hats here. I'm also the zone council rep in that area for Lobster Management Area 1. And I think they brought up a point that I've thought about long before. They allegedly hold a lobster license. They are not on my list of lobster license holders that I hold as the zone council rep in that area. So they must have, it's either a recreational license or they just obtained it this year because I haven't gotten the updated list. And anybody can go to the state and buy a commercial shellfish license. That does not make you a commercial fisherman. I think that this is a prime example of where that can happen, and I think that in order to prove that you are a commercial fisherman in a CF1 or a CF2 zone, you should have to show landings of some sort.
Exactly.
And there's other points I want to make, but that was the main one. Thank you.
Thanks, Matt.
I'm actually really happy to meet you because I've been trying to meet him for a while and he won't speak to us even though he's in a butter. And thank you for bringing up your concerns because I will fully address answering his question. Our son James is 16 and my family are commercial lobstermen in Bremen and they own a wharf and my brothers are. I had like 12, 13 cousins that are commercial fishermen. My mom holds a license to sell lobster. And our son James, because we were having some challenges here after we bought the property to have an opportunity to have him go out here, He has his license in Bremen, in that district. So he's been fishing out of Bremen. Now we're residents here, and so when he reapplies, he will have a sponsor. We have several lobstermen in the area that have been really helpful and kind, and I'm looking forward to talking with Mr. Gilly more about opportunities for James in the future. But yes, he will be getting his renewed license. We'll be here since we're now residents here, and I'm not sure what other questions he had besides that, but that's the plan. And I didn't mean to not answer that. I didn't realize that was a question. I thought it was like public knowledge too, like the state of Maine had it. You could find that information out pretty easily. So I'd be happy to provide you with that license number and all the detailed information about that.
Anybody else? Or we close the hearing?
I'll just speak one more time as the abutter. We had nothing but problems since the beginning. We showed up the first time I met them, they were cutting trees on our property. The second time I met them, they were moving the property pin on our property. So by no means have they been neighborly neighbors or followed any of the ordinances or anything in place thus far, so I don't see any reason to believe that they would going forth. And our family will pursue that on our own.
All right.
Again, thank you, Mr. Gilly, for expressing your concern, because he's not come to us with anything. He briefly met my husband. Again, I wasn't there. I have not met him. I've seen him in passing. It's unfortunate that it's come to this, that he's voicing his concerns to you, but I'm glad he's doing it in public so that we can fully address it. He does know the boundary lines, he doesn't, but his grandfather owns the property, and he's very familiar. We spoke with him directly, and he's very familiar with the boundary lines, and they're his survey that we're going off of. So it has nothing to do with our boundary lines. Unfortunately, he was under the impression, my understanding is what he yelled to my husband, because he is very upset. He is very passionate about this, and I don't blame him. This is very important stuff. And he expressed that his hunting app had the lines at a different angle. And this, again, isn't the side where it's the riparian lines that are in question. It's the other side of the property. And unfortunately, he was going by a hunting app, which is not really accurate. So we talked with his grandfather and explained that you go ahead and read your deed. We found the pins, the accurate pins, and someone had placed, and if I were to dare say, I'm not quite sure who put a pin where his hunting app said to put it, but it wasn't us, and it was only a 6-inch pin, not an actual pin that went all the way down in the ground. So there is some unfortunate situation happening here, and we're just trying to clarify to the best of our ability what we've purchased and what we can do with what we've purchased. And I'm a completely law-abiding citizen. I don't take kindly to people accusing me of things that I haven't done. I don't break the law. I don't have a criminal record. We're not manipulating anyone here. We're working class people. And this is complicated. This is very challenging. I had wished I'd spoken with you, Mr. Johnson, since you've been following this so closely. It would have been nice to have a little more information before tonight. And I look forward to getting to know all of you, since regardless of what happens to 28 Field Road, I'm going to be on 12 Holbrook. And I look forward to learning more about how to be productive and understand this community better. And again, I will absolutely do my best to try to talk with Mr. Gilly so he is comfortable with us. He does seemingly have a wonderful, important role in this community, and I hope to learn more from him about where he's coming from.
Thanks. So, could we hear from, who you withdrawing from the consent agreement? Is that what I heard you say? You want to?
No, we're talking about the fee. Depends where it lands.
My interest for the fee is covering our cost. I mean, we certainly have done everything we're legally required to do. And to have this issue come up is pushing us beyond that and costing us more than it would normally cost. So that my interest is in recouping some of that financial loss.
And it's been a lot of time in the code office dealing with this. The file has gotten quite thick.
Yeah, I understand that, and I work for a lot of towns too, and I know that the goal is always trying to cover the costs, but I really hope the board understands that in this case, if the notice of violation had been worded correctly, this could have been resolved in a matter of days. The problem was it didn't invoke this section 10.3.2, and you got to get a permit if it's under 50%. It didn't mention that at all. It said you need a permit if you're over 50% of the value. And so it really took like a month of discussion to understand it actually did morph. The town's position morphed over time to invoke that section. And again, if it had just been correct in the first place, I would have advised my client, just go get a permit after the fact. You'll pay 3 times the permit fee, no big deal. But he definitely did not want to be told that he was over the 50%, because that would mean he can't do an inch of work on that dock without making it conforming to the greatest practical extent, which is a very important, very expensive issue to make sure we didn't have a problem with. So I just, if we could go back in time and have more clarity, and I think even before that notice of violation, if the Clough's calls had been answered by the CEO, this would have been subject to a permit from the beginning. There just wasn't clear guidance, even though it was being discussed. So that's the point. I don't think we've heard what the town attorney's actual legal fees are, nor have I seen those bills. I would be surprised if they're at $5,000, but if they're at $5,000, it's really because the town attorney on at least one, maybe 2 occasions has had to come up to Board of Appeals meetings that really were not necessary, in the sense that we could have probably resolved this a long time ago.
I think David misspoke. This isn't to recover attorney fees. This is a fine.
Well, it says, the agreement itself,
Right,
it
legal
says it's
fees.
to offset the town's fees and costs.
And for the codes, yes.
It is both and I think the situation is a little bit of a he said, she said, and you are representing one side of that. The fact that this has gone on for as long as it has, the family has continued to pursue their goals with verbal feedback and notice from the codes office is very serious. Our attorney has said that this is not a usable dock unless it is fully rebuilt. And I understand why the clause is you can't chip away and rebuild it bit by bit. But I'm actually wondering if the family understands that this is a likelihood of having a dock there is going to be expensive in many ways. And that this is just one step in the road, and there are going to be many more.
Absolutely understood.
Okay.
And that's why everything is on pause while we wait to figure out this litigation, which determines what they're able to do with this dock. I think it was always known that it was going to be an expensive project, because the dock has to be rebuilt to be, properly usable. And that's why they paid what they paid for the property, It's a unique little property, but the fact is, all of these provisions that are in this case being applied to a dock also apply to every other structure in town. So that means the home that is in substantial disrepair but happens to be non-conforming and has been sitting there left undealt with by the family that owns it for years and years is going to be treated the same way as this too, which means that when somebody comes and buys that dilapidated home and wants to put their nice new cottage there, which happens all the time, the town would be taking the position that the second you replace a board on that house, you need a permit. Or that it was damaged 20, 30 years ago when people stopped maintaining it, and therefore you can't rebuild it today. There are big consequences of this line of thinking, and it can't just be applied to this one situation.
I hear your opinion. I think that if a person was coming to take down a house and build a new house, they would get a permit immediately.
Which is what my clients sought to do and what they will seek to do again before with the permit that was denied. But that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about they did some work to shore it up.
Sorry, madam, you brought it up.
Yeah, no, I'm just saying that, you know, that your town attorney said that when a structure has fallen into such disrepair that it's not well usable for its purpose, she's taking the position that you have potentially lost your opportunity to rebuild it. And that's an interesting, probably different tack than your code enforcement office takes when it comes to residential structures. So if a building is falling down and somebody buys it and wants to put a new cottage there.
We're talking about a dock.
Understood.
We're not talking about a building.
Yeah.
Please, let's stay on the subject.
They deal with it on a constant basis here in town. We have a lot of shoreline.
As the former chairman of the planning board, I can tell you that people tried everything to get around this 50% rule, and wanted to tear the place down and put a mansion right exactly where it was, 5 feet from the water. I understand that.
Yeah,
So-
and weirdly enough, I mean, you know, that is, you would think that shoreland zoning wouldn't want people to be able to do that, but it does allow it, and that damage, destruction, or removal applies, whether it's, you know, your intention to do it or whether it was Mother Nature or whatever.
So Jane suggested that this is a lot of hearsay, a lot of she said, he said, and I agree with that. And it's a kind of a complicated issue. Probably, you know, I'm willing to make a compromise of $3,000.
$3,500.
$3,500.
If
I
you have
hear
worked-
another bid.
You have worked very, very hard to put this together.
All right. I'll go
The
with 30.
town's legal
And there
fees have
has
been
been-
spent by these guys as well, so they're in it,
We understand that, but
yes.
I'd settle for
3,500.
35.
So that would be, when do we come out of,
When we come out of,
yeah, public hearing?
does anybody else want to speak to this? Amy's scribbling away.
I'll speak again. Be careful. I think you guys could be setting terrible precedent the other way too, you know, by lowering the fine, you know, and then you're gonna have to lower the fine for the next one, and the next one, and the next one. I mean, like you guys said, the code enforcement's,
No.
they've been down there half the year, it seems like. I see them every time I get on my boat, so I mean, they should recoup their cost.
But we haven't all agreed yet to lower the cost.
We have not-
Thanks, Kevin.
yeah.
So Matt, we take every situation independently, listen to everything. Hopefully we've, you know, come to a good conclusion that way.
Anybody else? Nope. All right, in that case, at this point, we will come out of executive session.
You mean you'll close the public
I
hearing?
closed public hearing, sorry.
Where are we?
I forgot where it was again.
What are all these people doing?
What are they doing in here? It's usually quiet in there. Thanks, Chrissy. See if you're paying attention. All right. I'm inclined to stick with the $5,000.
I think the issue is, I think that, I won't say there's fault on both sides, but I'm going to say that there was a lot of cloud here. And I can see where
Look at the file.
mistakes, oh, I know, I did look at the file, trust me, it's quite thick. A lot of photographs. But I would like to resolve this, and I would like to move forward. And as far as Jane, is what you said was the, he said, she said, I agree with that. And
I think the language is, I think the reality of what happened there is what it is. And
Yeah.
But
So I originally thought 3,000, but 35 I'd go with.
I'm sticking to my guns.
one of the things about this, and that I think about is there have been times when the select board has compromised and been very lenient, in my view, in my opinion. And we have tried to address concerns of the property owner in that respect. At the same time, and in my experience, that has not been a situation where the code enforcement office has been brought into the situation. It's been much simpler. This is not a simple one. It's a long-standing one. And it's important that the fine, to me, sorry, it's not a fine. It's the legal fees and the costs related to this violation come as close as possible to what the town has spent, including the time and the energy and the effort of the codes office, and that we not shortchange the value that has been put into this by our staff. And that would incline me to go higher. At the same time, we run the risk of having an appeals and more costs, but I think on balance, we need to make it very clear to everyone in town that the select board stands behind the code office in a very difficult situation like this. So I will go with the 5,000.
And the leniency you're talking about is the last time we did it, it was a contractor.
Who made the mistakes.
That did the bad.
That's right.
And
That's right.
they still got fined, but the homeowner was
Yeah.
unaware of what was happening.
Yeah.
This is a different situation here.
Very much so. Very much so.
So, is that a motion?
If you would like me to make it, I'll make the motion that we penalty of $5,000 to defray the cost of the town's legal fees and the costs related to the notice of violation.
I'm not going to second that because I think what you also said was we're facing more process if the fee is too high. I mean, I know that was a threat, but
It's up to them.
yeah.
Yep.
It's not up to us.
Right. I'll second it. All in favor? One abstention. One no.
Were you opposed?
I'm opposed.
He's opposed.
Opposed. All right.
Excuse me, point of clarification. I just want to make sure that what the board has voted on is to accept the consent agreement as drafted.
No, we haven't done that yet.
Okay, you're going to get to that.
Yes.
Yes.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Didn't mean to jump the gun.
Yeah.
Just didn't want you to leave without doing it.
Thank you,
Oh, no.
Amy.
We're not leaving for a while.
So I move we accept the consent agreement with the fine that you guys agreed on.
And as drafted.
Yes.
And I second.
Yeah.
Any discussion, any more on this? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
All right. Moving on. Outline regarding the rehabilitation of Mitchell Field Administration Building. What in the world do we have to talk about?
Which one is that?
Jane, I'm assuming you had a hand in this. It has a very professional look to it, so
Consultation with Christie and with Mark Ironman.
okay. Personally, I mean, I will speak personally, I think there's some room for negotiation here. I see the town's expectations, I agree with that, and as a selectman, I agree with that. It notices in here that one member of the select board may be involved in this. I wonder who that might be. But I will recuse myself whenever I think that's necessary. I don't think you guys need to tell me that. But I would suggest that there's some negotiation with, there's a nonprofit just being put together. And there needs to be some working together on this. For example, water and septic is something the town should do regardless of that building. It shouldn't be, it'd be nice if the nonprofit could pay for all that, but that's something that should happen without that, with or without that building. If the building's torn down, we're still gonna need water and septic down there. So I think there's
We
some.
don't, excuse me,
Go
David,
ahead.
we don't know what an alternative plan would be yet, so we don't know
Right,
about that.
Right, that's why I'm saying down the road somewhere. I mean, we could accept this tonight, but I would like it to be at some fairly soon point to be negotiable with the nonprofit that's taking this on.
Excuse me, but this is an outline to go to the entity that's taking it on to say what the town's parameters
The
are for
expectations.
doing it and expectations.
Yeah.
And if you read it, it says that we look to treat this project just as we do with the other lessees
Mhm.
on the property.
Mhm.
And I personally do not see a reason that we should make a different assumption about water and septic at this point in time, at the beginning of the planning. Whether it's negotiable or not, that would come
Mhm.
when we see what comes out of the plan.
Okay.
I agree.
Yeah.
So you're agreeing that even if we put this forward, then that there is room to negotiate at some point?
Potentially. I'm not saying there is. Potentially there is.
Potentially, maybe, possibly, okay.
I,
All right.
I think because I worked on this, the intent is to try to be upfront with an interested entity
Yep.
about what the town's expectations are.
Yep, yep.
And to assume that this entity would essentially take full responsibility.
It's very professional. It's very well
I also
done.
think there have been questions raised about if a member of the board is involved with a group and if this member is trying to make decisions on how the town as a whole should approach the project, that should be fully disclosed to the board.
Mhm.
And so, I mean, I just think we're trying to have an upfront, transparent process
Yep.
is what we're trying to do here.
And
Me too.
You'll be president of the new committee.
I think you
What
should
you're
just
saying.
disclose any involvement you might have, and so that this board can decide if you have an unbiased approach to even this framework.
At this point, I have very little participation in the process, just from the outside. Possibly I will get more involved, and I'll let you know when that happens.
I also want to say, David, you said that if you thought you were having some kind of conflict of interest, you would recuse yourself. The board has the right to request and expect your recusal if
Sure.
that is a different perception
Sure.
between
I'm
you
willing
and the
to argue
board.
with that at the point that we get there. I mean, there's certain reasons for recusing, and certain reasons why you don't have to, so. Sure.
Who's you day?
So,
All right. Need a vote on this, or just a little nod of the head?
You know, I think, again, if we want to try to give some direction to this entity about what the town's expectations are,
Yep.
if you're all on board and say, this is an initial framework, vote on it.
All right.
I move that unless there's more discussion.
no,
we'll
I
have it
no, I
afterwards.
agree with this. I agree with this. It's very professional, but I think there's some parts of it that need to be talked about in the future, and I don't want to close the door on that, that's all.
Okay.
This doesn't close the door on anything.
Good, I'll remember you said that, all right.
So I move that we accept this initial framework as written and ask our administrator to communicate it to whoever the entity
Yes,
turns
I
out
do
to
not
be.
know-
and-
I do not know the
And ask that
plan.
entity to come forward.
Okay.
It's still being put together, so,
Okay.
it won't happen tomorrow or next week, but very soon, very soon.
But I do think the town lays out a time frame too,
Yes,
because
yes.
if
Oh,
there
yeah.
is an expectation that this
Right.
board is going to take something to the March town meeting.
I think that was understood from
Okay.
the beginning. yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So I'll second that.
Any discussion on that? No. All in favor?
Aye.
All right. Ooh, just that. Proposed new traffic pattern on Route 123. How in the world did that get there?
There you go, Kev.
Anyhow, anybody out there has noticed something going on the corner of Middle Bay Road?
Yes.
The town of Brunswick, in their infinite wisdom, decided, they initiated it. We asked DOT, we thought DOT did. No, town of Brunswick started this mess without informing Harpswell, lovely neighbors as they are. So anyway, we have little recourse other than call DOT, call the town of Brunswick, and start complaining. We saw the traffic studies, and for a 10-year period, there were, how many, do you remember?
17.
17 in 10 years. Then there was a little upswing with 2018 to 2019.
19 to 21, I think.
Which happened to be the years that Wayfair was up and running on the base. There were 100 to 200 more cars coming in and out of there every day. So the information was taken in a vacuum to decide to put those hideous stop signs up. And the people who live there, I'm not going to be happy with, you get dump trucks stopping there and starting, one way going up the hill. With the dyers on the right, the dyers on the left, the other people living in there. It just ill thought of, and I think they misconstrued of all the traffic patterns, the amount of accidents. I guess the word nuts comes to mind. So anyway, that's my rant. I'm done.
They put a roundabout there. Traffic circle.
That would make more sense. Anybody else want to rant?
I don't. I'm on the other side of town.
Oh, yeah. Good point. I'm not. Well, I'm in the middle. David?
No, I almost got run into there once. Somebody stopped, and I stopped, and the guy behind me was too close, and he went right into the ditch.
Yeah, that can happen anywhere.
It's the only experience I've had. But I look very carefully when I pull out there, because it's...
All right. All right. What's that? Oh, yeah. Yeah, not gonna make it any better. All right. Just so we get the Danas out of here, you ready to sign the November warrant?
Yes.
Sometimes more than
Of
others.
course, I have this last minute. I don't know if I should put the referendum, huh?
We're not done.
So essentially, this document just, puts into a warrant format
Yep.
the referendum articles that you've already approved, the Shellfish Ordinance Amendment, the bond for a boat launch at Mitchell Field, the use of the remaining ARPA funds. We're also asking for authorization to accept the Working Waterfront Resiliency Grant and disperse it to up to 6 applicants who received that in Harpswell. And then the last article has to do with the voters authorizing the Select Board to enter into a multi-year lease agreement for a commercial solar farm not to exceed 5 acres at Mitchell Field. So there's nothing new being added
No.
to this, and the
Just a
ballot is
clean
being
copy.
You're
prepared.
going to try to sneak something else in there. Okay.
No.
Yep.
Well, I have a pen ready to sign this warrant, and I move that we do that.
Second.
All in favor?
Great, thank you.
Public comment? We get 2 left, 4 left? No? Other business?
I just have one item. The staff has been working on a contract for revaluation.
Oh,
And
goodness.
we are wondering if you're available to have a special meeting next Thursday.
No.
No.
The only day in 2 months.
So maybe a different date next week?
Wednesday?
Wednesday? Okay. We'll try to,
Next Wednesday.
What's next
does
Wednesday?
that work for people? Do we have?
Let me see.
The 25th? Five o'clock? No, what time do you want to do it?
5
It's a
o'clock,
regular.
I
Well,
think. We could do 5 o'clock.
it
5 o'clock on
it doesn't matter
Wednesday?
to me, but that's a short day. It's not a Thursday.
Is that 5 o'clock's fine?
5 o'clock, Wednesday, the 25th. Okay.
Or 4? Or I'm thinking about the office closing.
Which, is 4 okay
Sure.
on that Wednesday?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yep.
4 o'clock.
4 o'clock.
great, thank you.
Got to be flexible in this job.
All right. Anything else? All right. Seeing nothing else, we are adjourned.